I found my husband's account on this strange forum similar to Reddit last Monday. He'd been acting weird for months, always on his phone, working late, taking the kids on mysterious daddy days where they'd come back with new clothes and documents I never saw. While using his laptop, mine had crashed. I noticed he had this forum open in his browser. Jerome always said he didn't get social media, but there he was with a username I instantly recognized as his old gaming handle. And the post I saw made my blood freeze, leaving my disgusting wife. I thought I was hallucinating, but as I scrolled through his post history, I found dozens of comments and posts spanning 2 years, meticulously detailing his escape plan. The most recent post included photos of a school in Belgrade where our children, Timothy, 8, and Emma, 5, were apparently already enrolled for next semester. He wrote how I was a terrible mother, how he told embassy officials I was abusive to get emergency travel documents processed faster, how next month, during my sister Catherine's destination wedding, which he knew I was maid of honor for and couldn't possibly miss, he planned to disappear with our children forever. The post detailed flight information, apartment location, even how he'd already shipped boxes of their favorite toys labeled as business materials. And the comments. God, the comments. People congratulating him, offering advice on covering his tracks, warning about international custody battles. One username kept appearing repeatedly with supportive comments. I kept reading, sickened but unable to stop. Jerome had written about how he and someone reconnected 2 years ago and had been planning this together. She'd apparently moved to Belgrade last year to prepare everything. His most recent comment mentioned how they already had schools picked out, how someone was learning Serbian, how she'd be a real mother to my children. I sat there for hours, screenshotting everything, over 200 screenshots. My hands shook so badly I kept having to retype my password to email them to myself. I found references to bank accounts, job arrangements in Belgrade. He'd thought of everything. That night when Jerome came home, I nearly broke. He kissed my cheek, asked about dinner, played with the kids, like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't planning to steal them away forever in just 3 weeks. I watched him help Emma with homework while periodically texting someone, that woman, I presumed. I smiled when he suggested we watch a movie together, while inside I was shattered into a million pieces. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began investigating once he left. In his home office closet, behind his golf clubs he never uses, I found a locked metal box. The key was taped under his desk drawer. Not very creative, Jerome. Inside, Serbian language books, copies of the kids' birth certificates, a folder labeled Property Belgrade with photos of an apartment. Beneath all that was a notebook with a complete timeline. Meeting with his Serbian contact on March 7th, bank transfer confirmation from April 12th, school enrollment finalized on May 22nd, and finally, circled multiple times. Departure, June 17th, the second day of Catherine's 3-day wedding celebration. I called Dorothy, who works at our bank. She couldn't give me details, but her careful silence when I asked about large transfers told me everything. Then I checked our joint savings, almost entirely depleted, with only enough left that I wouldn't notice during regular bill payments. For the next week, I maintained perfect normalcy. I discussed Catherine's wedding details enthusiastically. I packed the kids' bags for their summer camp orientation weekend, which I now knew was actually a practice run for Jerome to see how much luggage he could manage alone with 2 children through an airport. Last night, I found emails between Jerome and the Belgrade school principal. The principal congratulated him on his upcoming move and mentioned they were excited to welcome the children of a single father starting fresh. Single father. He'd been telling everyone I was out of the picture already. I've spent the last week piecing together his elaborate plan while pretending everything is normal. Listening to him tell me he loves me before bed while knowing he's been calculating exactly how to destroy me. Watching him with our children, realizing each bedtime story might be one of the last I'd ever hear him read to them if his plan succeeded. This morning, I overheard him on the phone with someone discussing my sister's wedding. How perfect the timing was since I'd be distracted with bridesmaid duties, and how he'd already arranged for a rental car at the resort to take them to the airport 3 hours away. How I wouldn't notice they were gone until at least the reception. I've decided what I need to do. Not just any plan, but something that will destroy his entire carefully constructed future. First update. So I'm sitting in my car typing this out. I wasn't going to update so soon, but holy shit, the past 24 hours have been wild, and I need to get this out somewhere. Thank you for all the comments on my last post. After I found Jerome's detailed escape plans on that expatriate forum where he'd been posting about moving 400K to Serbia and planning to kidnap our children during my sister's wedding, I knew I needed to be smart. Not emotional, not confrontational. Just smart and methodical like he had been for 2 goddamn years planning behind my back. First thing I did was contact 3 lawyers. Not 1, 3. Because I needed someone who specialized in international custody cases and financial fraud. The first 2 basically said that's rough, but international cases are complicated. But the third one, Albert, actually listened. When I showed him the screenshots of Jerome's posts detailing the bank transfers, the photos of the Belgrade apartment, the school enrollment, and especially the part where he admitted lying to embassy officials about me being abusive, Albert literally stopped taking notes. He just looked at me and said he needed to make some calls. Right there in his office, he contacted a colleague who specialized in international parental kidnapping cases. He also immediately filed an emergency ex parte motion to freeze our remaining assets and get a temporary emergency custody order. What I didn't expect was Albert telling me I needed to act immediately regarding the money, not wait for court orders. He said once money leaves the country, it becomes nearly impossible to recover. So he advised me to transfer whatever was left in our joint accounts into a new account only in my name. It felt wrong and scary, but I did it. Moved the remaining $32,680 from our joint accounts to a new account at a different bank. Then came the hard part, maintaining the act with Jerome, pretending everything was normal while he talked about Catherine's wedding and how excited he was for our family vacation afterward, which I now knew was code for kidnapping the children to Serbia. Watching him pack summer clothes for the kids that I knew were actually their permanent wardrobe for their new life. I almost lost it when Emma showed me a bracelet Daddy bought me for our special trip. It had her name engraved in both English and Cyrillic. She was so excited about it, and I had to smile and say it was beautiful while my heart was being ripped out. The next day, I met with Albert again. He had news. The emergency custody order was granted. But that was just the first step. We also filed to have Jerome's passport and the children's passports flagged by border control. Albert explained this would trigger an alert if he tried to leave the country with them. But here's where things got complicated. We couldn't just take the kids' passports because Jerome would notice and it would tip him off. Albert advised me to let Jerome think his plan was still working. We needed him to attempt the kidnapping so we'd have concrete evidence. That's when I made a decision that kept me up all night. I had to let Jerome continue thinking he was going to successfully kidnap our children. I had to let him get all the way to the airport with them. Meanwhile, I was doing my own detective work. After finding the locked metal box in his office with all the Serbian documents, I noticed a phone number scribbled on one of the papers. It wasn't a US number. On a hunch, I ran it through a reverse lookup site, which showed it was registered in Serbia. When I checked our phone records, Jerome had been texting and calling this number almost daily for the past year. I couldn't access the actual messages, but the pattern was clear. Short calls early in the morning, when it would be afternoon in Serbia. Longer calls on weekends and clusters of texts that coincided with important dates in his planning timeline. After more digging through his desk while he was at work, I found a small notebook with initials and numbers. Most entries were labeled S, followed by payment amounts and dates. The same initial appeared next to notes about the Belgrade apartment and school registrations. That's when I connected the dots. S had to be someone in Serbia helping him, someone he was paying. I went through our bank statements again and found regular transfers to an account labeled only with initials. The transfers had started 2 years ago. Small at first, then larger as time went on. This wasn't just someone helping him. This was someone invested in the plan. The hardest part was acting normal with the kids, knowing that Jerome was preparing them for a life without me. He'd been teaching them basic Serbian phrases for months, disguised as a fun language game. Emma came home from kindergarten one day and proudly told me she knew how to say, "My name is Emma," in Serbian. I had to fight back tears while telling her how clever she was. Then yesterday, everything accelerated. Jerome came home and announced he needed to take the kids for passport photos, claimed they needed renewed passports for future travel. I knew he was actually getting final documentation ready for their escape during Catherine's wedding. I smiled and said of course, while texting Albert under the table. After they left, I finally did something I'd been avoiding. I called Catherine. My sister deserved to know her wedding was being used as cover for an international kidnapping scheme. I swore her to secrecy and told her everything. She was furious, not about her wedding being ruined, but about Jerome planning to steal her niece and nephew. She immediately offered to change wedding details to throw off his plan, but Albert had advised against tipping Jerome off in any way. When Jerome returned with the kids, he was practically glowing with confidence. He even suggested we have a special family dinner and took us all out for ice cream afterward. Watching him play the devoted father while knowing what he was planning made me physically ill. That night, after the kids were asleep, Jerome sat next to me on the couch and put his arm around me. He started talking about Catherine's wedding, how beautiful it would be, how he'd handle the kids during the ceremony so I could focus on my maid of honor duties. He was using our last weeks together to manipulate me into thinking he was being supportive. I almost threw up right there, but instead I leaned against him and played along. I even suggested he pack the kids' favorite toys for the wedding trip, knowing he'd already secretly shipped most of them to Belgrade. He kissed my forehead and said, "You always think of everything." With such false sincerity, I wanted to scream. This morning, I woke up to a notification from my banking app. Jerome had tried to access our joint account remotely and discovered the money was gone. Within minutes, my phone exploded with texts from him asking about the account. I didn't respond. 30 minutes later, he stormed into the house. He'd left early for work. His face was bright red. He demanded to know what happened to our money. I pretended confusion, said I thought we'd been spending a lot lately. He kept pushing, getting angrier, saying he needed that money for something important. I finally looked him straight in the eyes and asked what could be so important that he needed $30,000 without discussing it with me first. He stammered, actually stammered like a guilty child, then switched tactics, saying he was planning a surprise for after Catherine's wedding. That's when I almost broke character. This man was lying to my face so convincingly that if I hadn't seen his plans, I might have believed him, might have apologized and transferred the money back. falling right into his trap. Instead, I said I'd had to pay some unexpected bills and we could discuss the finances later. He seemed to calm down, but I could see the panic in his eyes. His perfect plan was showing cracks. After he left again, I got a call from Albert. The judge had approved our request to flag the passports and put a temporary travel restriction on the children. Albert also said we had a hearing scheduled for next week, but the immediate protections were in place. And then, the most chilling development. I decided to go through Jerome's laptop again while he was out. This time I found a folder of encrypted files that he hadn't properly secured. Inside were months of email exchanges with someone using only initials in the address. The emails confirmed everything. This person had been helping Jerome set up his new life in Belgrade. They discussed school options for the kids, apartment furnishings, even how to explain to the children why mommy wouldn't be coming with them. I kept reading, feeling sicker with each email. Then I found it, a document titled Timeline Final, with every detail of his escape plan. It had been updated just yesterday. The most terrifying part? He'd moved up the date. He wasn't waiting for Catherine's wedding anymore. The new departure date was in 3 days. The emails also revealed why. He'd gotten nervous about the money being gone from our account. He thought I might be suspicious and didn't want to risk waiting. His contact in Belgrade had wired him emergency funds to purchase the tickets for their new departure date. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Albert. I'm sitting here in my car outside our house watching Jerome move around inside, pretending everything is normal. The kids are at school. I've instructed their teachers not to release them to Jerome without my explicit permission. The police have been informed. But Jerome doesn't know any of this yet. He still thinks in 3 days he'll be starting his new life in Belgrade with my children and whoever is waiting for them there. I need to go back inside now and continue the act. Continue being the unsuspecting wife. It's the hardest role I've ever had to play. If anything major happens before the new departure date, I'll update again. Otherwise, my next post will probably be after Jerome is caught red-handed trying to flee the country with my children. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it. Second update, it's been 5 days since my last update. 5 days of living with a man who's becoming increasingly desperate as his plan falls apart piece by piece. 5 days of pretending I don't know he's planning to kidnap our children. 5 days of sleeping next to someone who has spent 2 years planning to destroy me. The day after Jerome discovered the money was gone from our joint account, he came home with flowers and my favorite takeout. Acting all sweet and concerned about how stressed I seemed about Catherine's wedding. He sat across from me at dinner, asking if everything was okay while checking his phone every few minutes, presumably updating his contact in Serbia about the money situation. I smiled and thanked him for being so thoughtful while fighting the urge to throw the food in his face. Instead, I played the role perfectly. Complained about Catherine being bridezilla, she's not. Showed him the maid of honor speech I was working on. Asked his opinion on which shoes to pack for the wedding. All while knowing he was planning to be on a plane to Serbia with our children while I was giving that speech. After dinner, he suggested we reconnect and led me to the bedroom. I almost couldn't go through with it. The thought of being intimate with someone plotting against me made my skin crawl. But Albert had warned me not to change my behavior in any way. So I went through the motions, feeling nothing but disgust as Jerome kissed me and whispered how much he loved me. Afterwards, he fell asleep quickly while I lay awake, silently crying and staring at the ceiling. The next morning, Jerome announced he needed to take the kids shopping for wedding clothes. I knew this was his cover for buying them travel outfits. I smiled and said it was a great idea, then casually mentioned I'd come along. You should have seen his face. Complete panic for a split second before he recovered. He made up some excuse about wanting it to be a daddy surprise, but I insisted. Said it would be fun for all of us to go together. In the store, I watched him select practical, layerable clothes, exactly what you'd want for international travel. When I suggested a fancy little dress for Emma that would be perfect for the wedding but completely impractical for travel, he got visibly annoyed, kept pushing for comfortable options instead. I pretended not to notice and bought the fancy dress anyway, saying Catherine would love seeing Emma in it. That night, after the kids were asleep, I carefully searched Jerome's office again. In a hidden compartment of his desk drawer, which I only found because I literally took the drawer out completely, I discovered a prepaid phone I'd never seen before. The text messages were mostly in a foreign language. Serbian, I assumed. I couldn't read them, but I could see the dates and times matched up with when Jerome would disappear to take work calls. I used my phone to photograph everything, making sure to put it back exactly as I found it. Then I sent the photos to Albert, who said he'd get them translated. The next day, Albert called with disturbing news. The messages had been translated, and they confirmed our worst fears. Jerome and his contact in Serbia had been making final arrangements for his arrival with the children. They discussed meeting points, temporary lodging before moving to the permanent apartment, and even plans to eliminate all traces of their previous life, which I took to mean destroying their American identity documents once they were safely in Serbia. Most chilling was the casual way they discussed me, as an obstacle to be overcome, not a person, not the mother of his children. In one message, Jerome wrote that he'd taken care of the bank issue, and his contacts shouldn't worry. He was still planning to leave in 2 days, despite the missing money. Albert advised me to be extra vigilant. He'd arranged for plainclothes officers to monitor our house, but I needed to ensure Jerome was never alone with both children at once. If he managed to get them into a car without me, he might make a run for it before the planned departure date. That day was the hardest yet. Jerome suggested he take the kids to the park while I relaxed and finished wedding preparations. I knew he was testing whether I would let them out of my sight. I casually said I'd come too. Needed the fresh air. His jaw tightened, but he agreed. At the park, Jerome was on his phone constantly. I pretended to be focused on Emma playing, but watched him from behind my sunglasses. He was texting rapidly, occasionally taking photos of the kids and sending them to someone. At one point, he walked away to make a call, speaking quietly and glancing over at us repeatedly. When we got home, I put the kids down for quiet time and went to check the mail, actually to update Albert. While outside, I noticed Jerome watching me through the window, phone in hand. He was reporting my movements to someone. The realization that I was being watched in my own home by my husband sent chills down my spine. That night, Jerome suggested we pack for Catherine's wedding early, since we were both so busy. I agreed enthusiastically. I watched him pack the kids' suitcases with way too many clothes for a 3-day wedding, enough for weeks or months. He was so focused on his task that he didn't notice me taking pictures of the packed bags when he went to the bathroom. After the kids were asleep, Jerome said he needed to finish some work and disappeared into his office. I used this opportunity to check his laptop again. He'd become more careful. Most files were now password protected, but he'd forgotten about the browser history on our shared tablet. I found searches for last-minute flights to various cities, not just Belgrade, but Vienna, Budapest, and Zagreb. He was looking for alternative routes. I forwarded everything to Albert, who confirmed our surveillance was in place. Police were prepared to intervene the moment Jerome attempted to leave with the children. Everything was set for his departure date, which was now tomorrow. I barely slept that night, listening to Jerome moving around the house at odd hours. I heard him on his prepaid phone at 3 a.m. speaking in hushed tones. Around 4 a.m. he came back to bed, but I could feel him watching me in the darkness, probably making sure I was asleep. In the morning, Jerome announced he needed to run errands and would be gone most of the day. I was immediately suspicious. Was he scouting routes, making final preparations? I asked casual questions about his plans, and he gave vague answers about last-minute wedding stuff and surprise preparations. Around noon, Jerome returned home looking agitated. He claimed the errands had taken longer than expected. I noticed he'd bought new luggage, compact, lightweight cases perfect for international travel. He said they were for future family vacations and stored them in the garage. That afternoon, the school called. Someone claiming to be Jerome's brother had tried to pick up the kids early, saying there was a family emergency. Thankfully, the school followed protocol and called me to verify, which I obviously couldn't. There is no brother. Jerome is an only child. I called Albert immediately, who contacted the police. They arrived at the school within minutes, but the man was already gone. The school's security camera captured images of him, a stranger I'd never seen before. When Jerome came home from work, I didn't mention the school incident. Instead, I watched him closely, looking for signs he knew his accomplice had failed. He seemed tense but not panicked, checking his phone frequently, but maintaining his act of normalcy. He even helped Timothy with homework and read Emma a bedtime story. That night, Jerome was unusually attentive with the kids, helping with homework, playing their favorite games, letting them stay up late. He was saying goodbye without them knowing it. He even got emotional during bedtime stories, his voice cracking as he read Emma's favorite book. If I hadn't known what he was planning, I might have found it touching. Once the kids were asleep, Jerome suggested we have a glass of wine on the porch, something we hadn't done in months. As we sat there, he started reminiscing about when we first met, our early days together. He asked if I remembered our first apartment, our first vacation. It was surreal. This man taking a nostalgic tour through our relationship the night before he planned to destroy it forever. I played along, sharing memories and smiling at his stories while my heart hammered in my chest. As we headed to bed, Jerome hugged me tightly and whispered that he was so lucky to have me. I wanted to scream, to push him away, to confront him with everything I knew. Instead, I hugged him back and said I felt the same, the ultimate performance of my life. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to Jerome moving quietly around the bedroom at 5 a.m., getting dressed in the dark. Our flight to Catherine's wedding wasn't until 4 p.m. His escape flight must be early morning. I pretended to be asleep as he leaned over and kissed my forehead before leaving the room. I heard him go into the kids' rooms next, presumably to get them ready without waking me. That was his first mistake. Why would he get the children up at 5 a.m. for an afternoon flight? I waited until I heard him in Timothy's room, then silently texted Albert. It's happening now. Within seconds, Albert confirmed police were on standby. He told me to stay calm and let Jerome continue with his plan. I lay there listening to Jerome quietly waking the children, telling them they needed to be very quiet because mommy is sleeping and we're going to surprise her. I heard Emma's confused little voice asking why they had to leave so early. Jerome hushed her, saying it was a special adventure. The sound of my daughter's confusion broke something in me. I couldn't just lie there anymore. I got up and walked down the hall to find Jerome zipping up the kids' wedding suitcases while they sat groggily on Timothy's bed in their travel clothes. I stood in the doorway and asked in the calmest voice I could manage what was going on. Jerome froze like a deer in headlights. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. Pure panic. He recovered quickly though, saying he was getting a head start on packing for Catherine's wedding. At 5 a.m., with the kids already dressed, with their passports in his pocket, I could see the edge of them. I asked why the kids were already dressed. Jerome stammered something about taking them for a special breakfast before we had to get ready for the wedding. Timothy, still half asleep, innocently said, "Daddy told us we're going on an airplane today to see his friend." Jerome's face went white. He shushed Timothy and told him not to ruin the surprise, then turned to me with the most forced smile I've ever seen and said he'd planned a special pre-wedding excursion for the kids while I finished my maid of honor duties. I pretended to be confused but not suspicious. Asked innocent questions about this sudden plan. Jerome grew increasingly agitated, checking his watch repeatedly. He finally said they needed to go or they'd be late for their reservation. He tried to usher the kids past me toward the door. I stood my ground and said I didn't understand why they needed suitcases for breakfast. He grabbed the kids' hands and said they were leaving, right now. That's when I took out my phone and showed him I'd been recording our entire conversation. Told him I knew everything. The expatriate forum posts, the money transfers, his contact in Serbia. His face went through a series of emotions: shock, rage, then something truly frightening, cold determination. He lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. Told him police were already at the airport waiting for him. Told him his passport had been flagged. Told him there was no way he was taking my children anywhere. He suddenly switched tactics completely, telling the kids to go back to their room for a minute. Once they were gone, he turned to me with tears in his eyes, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he'd been planning a surprise vacation, not a permanent move, that his Serbian contact was just a friend helping with arrangements, that the forum posts were fiction, creative writing exercises. The lies poured out of him so smoothly, so convincingly that for a split second I almost doubted myself, almost wondered if I'd misunderstood everything. That's how good he was at manipulation. But then I remembered the bank transfers, the Belgrade apartment, the school enrollment forms. 2 years of meticulous planning exposed in his own words. I told him it was over, that I had everything documented, that the only choice he had now was whether to leave peacefully or be arrested in front of our children. He hissed that I had ruined everything, that the children would have been better off without me, that his contact would have been a real parent to them. I stood my ground as he grabbed his keys and stormed toward the door. As he reached for the handle, I said one last thing, that the police were monitoring all airports and borders, that he would be arrested the moment he tried to leave the country. I immediately called Albert, who confirmed police were monitoring both Jerome and all transportation hubs. I'm with the kids now, waiting. Police are looking for Jerome, who apparently drove straight past the nearest airport. His phone is turned off. Somehow, despite all our preparations, Jerome still has one last card to play. And I have no idea what it is. I'll update when I can. For now, I'm holding my children tight and waiting for news about where Jerome is headed. Last update. I've been trying to write this update for days, but everything has been absolute chaos. First, thank you to everyone who sent supportive messages after my last post. It's been a nightmare, but knowing thousands of internet strangers were rooting for me and my kids honestly helped more than you know. So where did I leave off? Jerome had fled after I confronted him, abandoning his car at a train station. His cryptic words about having contingency plans kept replaying in my head as I sat with the kids, jumping at every noise, waiting for news. Albert called to tell me police were tracking Jerome's movements and he advised me to take the kids somewhere safe just in case Jerome doubled back. So I packed a quick overnight bag, told the kids we were having a surprise sleepover at Auntie Catherine's, and drove to my sister's house across town. Timothy kept asking where Daddy was, and I had no idea what to tell him. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his father was trying to kidnap him? Around noon, Albert called with an update. Police had reviewed the train station security footage and confirmed Jerome had boarded a train, but not to the airport, to a bus station near the state line. Apparently, he had a backup plan I hadn't discovered. They found footage of him purchasing a ticket to a city 3 hours away, where there was a smaller regional airport with flights to Canada. That's when it clicked. Canada wasn't his final destination. It was another waypoint. From Canada, he could fly to numerous countries with fewer questions. The contingency plan comment made sense now. He'd deliberately left evidence of the Serbia plan knowing I might find it, while keeping his real escape route hidden. I felt sick realizing how calculated he'd been, how many layers of planning he'd put into stealing our children. Waiting was excruciating. Catherine tried to keep me distracted, but my mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Jerome had yet another backup plan? What if the police missed him? What if he somehow managed to get the kids later? Around 4 p.m., Albert called again. Regional airport security had identified Jerome checking in for a flight to Toronto. He was traveling alone, obviously unable to bring the kids with him after being caught that morning. Police were moving in to apprehend him before he boarded. I sat at Catherine's kitchen table, clutching my phone and waiting for news. 30 minutes later, Albert confirmed. Jerome had been arrested at the gate. When officers approached, he initially tried to run, then attempted to claim it was all a misunderstanding. He was just taking a business trip. But the one-way ticket, combined with all our evidence, was damning. Jerome was taken into custody for attempted international parental kidnapping, fraud, and making false statements to federal officials about me being abusive to get travel documents. Albert advised me that these were serious charges that could result in significant jail time. The next day was a blur of police statements, calls with Albert, and trying to maintain some normalcy for the kids. I decided to bring them home, thinking it would be better for them to be in familiar surroundings. That night, Jerome called from jail. I almost didn't answer, but Albert had advised me to record any communication. He begged me to drop the charges, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he loved the kids and was just trying to give them a better life. When that didn't work, he switched to threats, said he'd fight for full custody, tell everyone I was mentally unstable, destroy my reputation. I let him talk himself into a deeper hole, recording everything. When he finally ran out of steam, I simply said that every word he'd just spoken would be provided to the prosecutor, then hung up. The next few days were a nightmare of practical and emotional challenges. I had to explain to Timothy and Emma that Daddy had done something wrong and wouldn't be coming home for a while. Timothy asked if it was because Daddy tried to take them on an airplane without telling me. Kids notice everything. Emma cried for her father every night that week. It broke my heart knowing she missed someone who had been willing to rip her away from one of her parents forever. Timothy became withdrawn, playing alone in his room for hours. I arranged for both of them to see a child psychologist, who assured me their reactions were normal and they would need time and support to process everything. A week after Jerome's arrest, we had our first court hearing. I came face to face with him in the courtroom, and it was like looking at a stranger. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His lawyer tried to argue for bail, claiming Jerome wasn't a flight risk. An absurd statement given the circumstances. The judge denied bail, citing the obvious flight risk and the seriousness of the charges. After the hearing, Jerome's parents approached me in the hallway. They'd flown in from Florida after hearing about his arrest. I'd always had a decent relationship with them, but they seemed confused and hostile. It became clear Jerome had been feeding them the same lies he told his Serbian contact, that I was abusive, unstable, a terrible mother. They actually believed their son was the victim. I showed them the screenshots from Jerome's forum posts right there in the courthouse hallway. Watched their faces crumple as they scrolled through 2 years of their son's detailed plans to kidnap his children. The lies about me, the money transfers, all of it. During the investigation, police finally identified Jerome's Serbian contact through the international phone records and money transfers. It wasn't just some random helper. It was his ex-girlfriend from college, someone he'd dated before we met. She had moved to Serbia 2 years ago for a job, precisely when Jerome started his planning. They'd reconnected and apparently rekindled their relationship, with her becoming an active participant in the kidnapping scheme. This woman, this stranger, had been preparing to become my children's new mother figure. She'd been helping Jerome set up their new life, enrolling them in schools, furnishing their apartment, even learning Serbian phrases to teach them, all while knowing he was planning to steal them from me. The preliminary hearing was set for the following month, but Albert called 2 weeks later with news. Jerome wanted to make a deal. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his lawyer had advised him to plead guilty to reduce charges rather than face the maximum penalties at trial. The prosecutor offered a deal. Jerome would plead guilty to attempted international parental kidnapping and fraud, serve a minimum of 6 years in federal prison, forfeit all parental rights, and repay the money he'd transferred overseas. In exchange, they'd drop some of the lesser charges. I agreed to the deal. Not out of mercy, but because it guaranteed Jerome would be out of our lives for years and the children wouldn't have to testify or be further traumatized by a lengthy trial. Authorities also investigated his ex-girlfriend in Serbia, but the legal complexities of international prosecution made it difficult to charge her directly. However, with Jerome's plea deal including full cooperation, she was now on international watch lists, and her visa status in Serbia was under review. The day Jerome took the plea deal, I sat in the courtroom watching the man I had loved, the father of my children, acknowledge his crimes in a flat, emotionless voice. When asked if he understood he was giving up his parental rights, he simply nodded and said yes. No tears, no last-minute declarations of love for his children. Nothing. Outside the courthouse, Albert explained what would happen next. Jerome would be transferred to a federal prison. The paperwork terminating his parental rights would be processed. The divorce would be finalized within months. We would begin the long process of recovering the money he'd hidden abroad, though Albert warned me not to expect all of it back. That night, I sat on my porch alone after the kids were asleep, trying to process everything. The man I'd built a life with had spent years systematically planning to destroy me. The future I thought we had was built on lies. The father my children adored had been willing to traumatize them forever, just to hurt me. I cried until there were no tears left. Not for Jerome, but for what might have been. For the family we could have been if he'd been the person I thought he was. Update. It's been 3 months now since Jerome was arrested. He's serving his sentence in a federal prison 4 states away. He's made no attempt to contact me or the children since the sentencing. The divorce was finalized last week. The judge granted me full custody, though that was just a formality since Jerome had already forfeited his parental rights. Our house is being sold and the kids and I are moving to a new place next month. Catherine's wedding was postponed but finally happened last month. Being her maid of honor while dealing with everything else was challenging, but it felt important to celebrate something positive. Watching her marry someone who truly loves her was bittersweet, a reminder of what I thought I had versus the reality. As for me, I'm taking it day by day. Some mornings I wake up angry all over again, reliving the betrayal. Other days I feel almost peaceful, grateful that I discovered the truth before it was too late. I've started therapy too, trying to understand how I missed the signs for so long. Sometimes I think about the alternate reality, What would have happened if I hadn't found that expatriate forum post? If Jerome had succeeded in taking my children to Serbia? If I'd come back from Catherine's wedding to an empty house and children I might never have seen again? That thought still wakes me up in cold sweats. But he didn't succeed. My children are asleep down the hall, safe in their beds. Jerome is in prison. His ex-girlfriend is out of our lives. The money is mostly recovered. The legal nightmare is mostly over. To everyone who followed this nightmare with me, who offered advice and support and outrage on my behalf, thank you. Your comments and messages helped me feel less alone during the darkest moments. I almost lost everything because I trusted someone who spent years plotting against me. Don't make the same mistake. I don't know if I'll post any more updates.